There are true crime stories that shock you. And then there are stories that make you question whether you ever really know the people closest to you. The Chris Watts family murders belong to the second category, a case so ordinary on the surface that its ending feels impossible to believe. Before we dive into this chilling story, take a quick second to subscribe to the channel. If you love deep, well-researched true crime breakdowns that keep you hooked from start to finish, you're in the right place. Now, let's begin. From the outside, the Watts family looked perfect. Chris Watts was a quiet, hard-working oil field operator in Colorado. His wife, Shanann, was confident, organized, and deeply involved in social media. Together they had two beautiful little girls, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Cece, and another baby on the way. Their Facebook pages were filled with smiling photos, birthday parties, family vacations, and everyday moments that made them seem like the picture of the American dream. Friends described them as loving parents, a happy couple, and a normal suburban family. But behind the filtered photos and cheerful captions, cracks were forming. Chris had recently begun an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. What started as secret messages and lunch dates quickly turned into something more serious. To Chris, it felt like an escape, a new life without responsibility. Meanwhile, Shanann was fighting to save her marriage. She sensed distance in her husband, but she didn't know the real reason. She was planning for their future, preparing for their third child, and trying to hold her family together. By the summer of 2018, tension inside the Watts home had reached a breaking point. Money problems, emotional distance, and Chris's secret relationship created a silent storm. Yet to everyone else, nothing seemed wrong. Then, on August 13, 2018, everything changed. That morning, Shanann's friend grew worried when she didn't respond to messages. Shanann had just returned from a business trip and was always punctual, always organized. When she missed a doctor's appointment and stopped answering her phone, alarm bells went off. A welfare check was called in. Police arrived at the Watts home and found something unsettling. Shanann's car was still in the garage, her purse and phone were inside, and the girl's medication was untouched. It was as if the entire family had simply vanished into thin air. Chris Watts appeared calm when questioned. Too calm. He told officers he had last seen his wife and daughters that morning before leaving for work. He said he had no idea where they went and begged for their safe return. Television cameras soon filled the street. Standing in his driveway, Chris pleaded on the news for his family to come home. "If somebody has her, just bring her back," he said with a blank stare. "I need to see everybody. I need to see my kids." To many viewers, something felt wrong. His body language was off. His emotion didn't match the situation. A desperate husband should have been frantic. Instead, he seemed distant, almost rehearsed. Investigators began looking deeper. They interviewed neighbors and quickly discovered a crucial piece of evidence. A home security camera across the street had recorded Chris loading his truck early that morning. It was a detail that didn't fit his story. At the same time, detectives uncovered his affair. Messages between Chris and Nicole painted a picture of a man planning a new life, one that didn't include a pregnant wife and two little girls. As the hours turned into days, suspicion grew. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. Inside a quiet interrogation room, he failed it almost immediately. Faced with the results, his story began to crumble. First, he claimed Shanann had killed the children in a rage and that he had killed her in response. It was a desperate lie, one investigators didn't believe for a second. The truth was far darker. Just 3 days after his family was reported missing, Chris Watts was arrested for their murders. Their bodies were discovered at an oil field where Chris worked, the very place he had been seen driving to on the morning they disappeared. America watched in disbelief as the case exploded across headlines. How could a seemingly normal father annihilate his entire family? What happened inside that house in the early hours of August 13th? The answers would soon come, and they would reveal one of the most disturbing confessions in modern true crime history. When Chris Watts finally confessed, the world expected tears. What they got instead was chilling calm. Sitting in a small interrogation room, wearing a plain t-shirt and a blank expression, he described the final hours of his family as if he were reading a routine report. No shaking voice. No emotional breakdown. Just cold, mechanical details that made the nightmare even worse. Investigators already knew he was lying. They had seen the security footage from his neighbor's house showing Chris loading his truck in the early hours of the morning while his family was supposedly missing. They had tracked his phone records, uncovered his affair, and analyzed his emotionless TV interviews. So when he finally admitted the truth, it wasn't shocking that he was guilty. What shocked them was how far he had gone. According to his final confession, the night began with an argument. Shanann had just returned from a business trip. She was 15 weeks pregnant, exhausted, and trying to save a marriage she didn't realize was already over. Chris told her he didn't love her anymore. He admitted the affair. He said he wanted a separation. The conversation turned bitter, and sometime between 4 and 5 a.m., inside the bedroom they once shared, Chris Watts strangled his pregnant wife to death. She never had a chance to fight back. And in the silence that followed, two small voices interrupted everything. Bella and Cece were awake, confused and frightened. Bella asked, "Daddy, what are you doing?" In that moment, Chris stood in a house he had already destroyed, looking into the eyes of his innocent children, and made a decision that would haunt the world forever. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and carried her to his work truck. Then, with his two daughters still alive beside him, he drove to a remote oil site owned by his company. It was a place he knew well, isolated and quiet, a place he believed no one would ever think to search. At that lonely industrial field, the final act unfolded. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave in the dirt. Then he turned to his daughters. Cece was killed first while Bella watched. Later, in one of the most haunting details of the entire case, Chris admitted that Bella asked him a question no child should ever have to ask, "Daddy, are you going to do to me what you did to Cece?" He answered that question with his hands. Bella Watts was the last to die. Their tiny bodies were placed inside massive crude oil tanks, a grotesque attempt to hide what he had done. By 6:30 that same morning, Chris was texting coworkers and acting as if it were just another normal Monday. To him, it was supposed to be a fresh start. A life without responsibility. Without a wife, without children, without obstacles to his new relationship. Instead, it became one of the most infamous murder cases in modern American history. The legal process moved quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Chris Watts never went to trial. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with deceased bodies. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. No chance of freedom. No chance of appeal. No chance to ever rewrite the story he created. But even after the conviction, one question remained: why? How could a seemingly normal man destroy his entire family for an affair? Psychologists and investigators have debated it for years. Some point to narcissism, others to emotional detachment. Many believe it was simply the darkest form of selfishness. A man who wanted a new life and chose the most brutal way to get it. And then there is Shanann. In the days after the murders, her social media became a digital memorial. Video after video surfaced of a devoted mother, laughing with her girls, celebrating birthdays, planning for the baby she would never meet. Those videos changed everything. The case stopped being just another headline and became heartbreakingly real. Bella singing to her father. Cece dancing in the living room. A family frozen in time, unaware their story was already ending. The Watts house in Frederick, Colorado, still stands today. New families have moved in and out, and the neighborhood has tried to return to normal. But for millions of people, that home will always be remembered as the place where trust was betrayed in the most unimaginable way. True crime stories often have mysteries, unknown suspects, missing clues, unanswered questions. The Chris Watts case is different. There is no who. There is no maybe. There is only a terrible, undeniable truth: a father chose to erase his family instead of facing the consequences of his choices. And that is what makes this case so disturbing. Not because it is complicated, but because it isn't. Because the monster wasn't a stranger hiding in the dark. It was the man they loved, the man they trusted, the man who was supposed to protect them. The story of Sean-Ann, Bella, and Cece Watts is a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it waves to neighbors. Sometimes it stands on a driveway begging for help on television. And sometimes, it lives in the same house as the people who trust it most. If you want more deeply researched, gripping true crime stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. There are many more cases to uncover, and many more truths waiting to be told.